All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday, first day of June. It is beautiful, is it not? Pretty nice. I have no announcements this morning. Do you have any announcements this morning? Are there things that we all should know before we start? No? I can only talk about the weather so much, so you can add things in if you like.
I don't have anything to add.
You have nothing to add?
Should I have something to add?
I don't know, do you? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, let's see who's here. Basil's here this morning. Good morning to you, Basil. Sean's here. Good morning, Sean. Hamad's here. Good morning, Hamad. Awais is here. Good morning to you. And of course, by good morning, I often mean good evening because some people are on the other side of the planet. Zartaj is here. Good morning, Zartaj. Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Elizabeth is here. Good morning. Simran is here. Good morning to you. And Mir is here. Good morning, Mir. So, yesterday we were talking about privilege, right? And so I had asked you to read that article on unpacking the invisible knapsack, which, I don't know, I really don't like that metaphor. I don't think it's the best metaphor for privilege, but it's the one she used, and so we're all stuck with it now. But we did learn that, privilege is something where you can do something that other people cannot, right? Or other people can do things that you don't or you can't if you don't happen to have privilege, right? And so we said that this can be sort of a complicated thing because often it's invisible. Often when people are being benefited by, sorry, I'm gonna have a sip of coffee because I think that might help my mouth work better. What do you think? Wow, that's so hot. Okay. So, privilege is often difficult to talk about and difficult to understand because, again, people who have it don't often realize that they do. We talked about the idea that they're often socialized to not see it or to not believe in it. When it's working, often you don't really realize that it is, but you certainly realize when it's not there. And some of the aspects of privilege they're not necessarily bad things. We just need to make sure that they're extended to everyone, not just a certain group some of the time, right? So again, it is difficult to talk about it, and it's particularly difficult to talk about it with people in dominant groups and people who are a little bit sensitive about this sort of thing. But it does exist, I'm sorry to say. We were talking yesterday about kind of the external and the internal kind of manifestations of prejudice, right? Or privilege, right? And so we said that dominant groups kind of build a society that works for them. And we can see that in the sort of structures, right? In the physical way that the world is created. And so one of the examples I gave you yesterday is that, you all came to school this morning, or we can pretend that you did if you're online. And you probably didn't think anything of encountering curbs or stairs or streets with no traffic lights that you had to cross or any of that stuff, right? You navigated it seamlessly because, again, we're all in this able-bodied group, right? The world is designed for us, right? You're all sitting in chairs that are reasonably comfortable for you. I know they're not that comfortable, but reasonably comfortable. They are built for people like you, right? But the world is not built for everybody, right? And so some people experience barriers, challenges, things they have to sort of get around or get over in order to live their lives, right? The construction of what's normal and not normal by the dominant group. So the dominant group gets to say what the sort of normal thing is, right? I think yesterday I was trying to come up with an example of that, but I struggled to, but the story will help us in just a second. And of course, the invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. Now, in terms of internal or attitude expressions of privilege, usually people in the dominant group believe that they have a right to their position, right? And so I'll show you some of the ways that people might think about this in just a second. Sometimes they have internalized messages of their own group's superiority, right? So sometimes they'll think they're better than others. Often people in the dominant group don't know a lot about people in minoritized groups, but that doesn't really bother them so much. Kind of a textbook example of this, and I'm sorry Americans, but I'm going to use you. My perception is that Americans don't really know too much about the rest of the world. Okay, and so and I think this is an aspect of privilege, because they are a very powerful country and they think they're the greatest country in the world. They don't really pay a lot of attention to other countries, right? They don't know where a lot of other countries are. They don't know what it's like. They think up here in Canada, they think we're all riding polar bears and, living in ice houses and things like that. Not so much anymore, but they used to. And so they don't know a lot about the rest of the world, but that doesn't really bother them either, right? Because they still think they're the best. Sorry, Americans. And again, invisibility of privilege. So we read this little fictional story yesterday about people with 3 eyes and people with 2 eyes. And what were some of the external elements of privilege here? The parts of the physical environment that were created for the benefit of 3-eyed people.
The sex.
The what?
Sex. The sex was written in a certain way that people cannot read it.
Right. Our main character, she goes to a play, she's reading the program, and the program is designed so that the person in front of her can read it with their eye in the back of their head, right? And so she kind of struggles, not because she can't read or see, but because this thing is not made with her in mind, right? What else?
The menu was on
Nicole said the glasses, right? So with the lens in the back, right? Even though she can wear them, but they're not really designed for her. Sorry, Rafay?
the menu, the restaurant or the wall.
Right. The menu on the wall is kind of located behind everyone, which is not a problem for 3-eyed people, but our protagonist struggles with that. What else? Where does, at the beginning of the story, where does our protagonist actually come from? She comes from where? Well, no, she kind of goes into the main part of the city, but she lives in she kind of lives in a gated community, right? She's segregated from the other 3-eyed people, to the point where she's actually surprised to see 3-eyed people, right? So that's a structural element too, right? Is that the 2-eyed people are living separate, right? They are separated to the point where our protagonist is surprised to see people with 3 eyes, and the 2-eyed people seem pretty put off by her presence as well, right? They're like, was it in the store, or is like, what is she even doing here anyway, right? So clearly 2-eyed people do not really belong in this 3-eyed people society, right? They're very separate, very segregated. What else? Other physical things.
The woman that said why the 2-eyed people are shiny.
Let's say that one more time.
I think the woman said why 2-eyed people are shiny.
Oh yeah. Well, that's an internal one. That's an internal one. But hang on to that one for a second, because that's worth talking about as well. Oh yeah, the cane at the play, right? So she can find her way to her seat, even though she doesn't need it. None of us need one, but yeah, she's provided with one. I think the only other one I can think of is maybe the surgery. Maybe the surgery is an external one as well. They've developed technology to make sure that you can have your 3rd eye, because Who would want to live with only two eyes, right? Horrible. I'm sure all of you are just, imagining your life is a waste with only two eyes, right? Okay, let's talk about the internal ones. So, Malika, you had you said in the store, the teenage girls or whatever, they said, "Oh, why are two-eyed people so angry?" Right? Why are they so angry? Or why is our character angry?
Because the first behavior was like, basically, she's really honorable,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to show that her that she's different, and I think it's makes her angry.
Yeah, they were. Well, would you say that the other girls were being rude?
No, we're like staring at her and disgusting things. Like when you hear someone stare and you look at something abnormal
Yeah.
and you just like look at it with disgust.
Kind of, right? So, but would you say there's a difference? Like, sure, certainly if you see someone who just looks different, yeah, sometimes you take a second look, right? Because your eyes are just moving around and you're like, whoa, what's going on? Oh, okay, right? But there's a difference between taking that second look and like staring at someone, right? That's a little different, right? And so, yeah, maybe they took a second look, but then they stared and then they said some things too, right? What did the girls say? Or they said something and they did something, if I remember. You may consult your story if you choose.
Oh yeah, they said, "Oh my God, can you imagine being born like that?"
Oh my God, can you imagine being born like that? I don't know. How do you think it feels to hear that about yourself? Not very good, right? And what else are those girls doing?
They, the one of them called out across the store. What happened to you?
Oh, okay. So yeah, like what happened to you, right? What's wrong with you? Why are you not normal, right? Good morning. And then there's something else too, as if that's not enough.
Why are two-eyed people always so angry?
Right? Why are two people always so angry? And what else happens?
They said,
They do what?
They show the pair of the two-eyed people, the pair of glasses.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's the sales lady, right? Yeah, the sales lady kind of directs her over and says, "Oh no, dear, these are the two-eyed ones."
so just to make her look more like a freak, one of them says, "Oh my God, this is going to be my Halloween costume."
Right. Oh my God, this is going to be my Halloween costume, right? Can you imagine just standing waiting for the SkyTrain and somebody taking a picture of you, which I think they do as well, and say, "Oh my God, this is totally going to be my Halloween costume"? Is that complimentary? No, it's not, right? So just in the space of I don't know, 30 seconds, a lot of stuff is coming at our character, right? And what's the underlying message of all those things? What's being communicated? Yeah, abnormality, right? She's not normal, right? She's weird. She doesn't belong, right? Yeah. Okay. So what other internal or attitudinal things do we see happening?
People, like three of them, they're being pitiful.
They're being how?
Pitiful.
Pitiful?
Yeah.
It seems like it, right? It seems like the reaction of the three-eyed people is either pity or what? Or rudeness, right? Of ugh, right? Ugh, two-eyed people, gross, right? So yeah, you see these kind of two two opposing treatments, and nobody's really treating her like a regular human, right? They're either like, oh, you poor thing, right? Let me show you the two-eyed glasses, right? Because clearly you can't figure this out for yourself, right? The pity, or there's the rudeness, and in the store we see both of those things, at the same time. What else? Other internal or attitudinal ones. What about when she first goes into the diner or the restaurant to have lunch? Yeah, the children are scared, right? People are staring at her or pointing at her or having a reaction to her, right? Which she's a little confused about. What else happens in there?
And she stretched out her hand to get the open, then it just hesitated.
Right. So she gets the change from her lunch and she puts her hand out and the waitress puts it on the table, right? Pre-COVID, by the way. So, yeah, what's the message there? What's that? It's like I don't want to touch you, right? You're somehow something I don't want to come into contact with, right? Other ways, what else?
What about the doctor one?
Oh, the
Where
doc.
doctor said, I can fix you.
Yeah, I can fix you, right? Don't you want to be normal? Right? So again, very clear communication of the idea that that three-eyed people are superior, right? Don't you want me to fix you? Don't you want to be normal, right? What else? There's another pretty big one in this story. There's a few more, but there's a big one.
What about the part where she goes to watch some play and then when she's doing the text, so third eye people, like one of the third eye group member says, do you need help?
Right. And how does he say it?
No idea.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that's a more minor detail, but it's also in how he says it, right? Because he doesn't just say, "Excuse me, do you need some help?" It's like, "Do you need help?" Right? And again, what does that do? Yeah, right. Big spotlight on her. Here's the two-eyed person who can't even read a program, right? Here's the one who's different, right? What about the play itself? What's the play about?
It's about two-eyed people and the
Is it about when a third eye, so like when a three-eyed person loses his eye and then becomes two-eyed person?
Yeah, right. So it's the life story of someone who loses their third eye. Oh, tragic, right? This young man was young and beautiful and had their whole life ahead of them, and now it's all lost, right? They're ugly, two-eyed freaks, right? Their life is over, but they carry on so bravely, right? And if you think about it, this is not. We kind of recognize this story, don't we? That story's been told a lot of times, not necessarily with, eyes, but that story's been told a lot of times, right? It's kind of an inspiration porn sort of thing, right? So people can be inspired by people who are overcoming struggles, right? But which to some degree is fine, but here the struggle is simply that, they've been made different. Right? And again, most of us can intuitively know that is living life with two eyes that bad? Of course not, right? Living life with two eyes is great. Did you all go home yesterday and sort of like, oh man, I wish I had a third eye in the back of my head? Did anyone wish that? No, nobody wished that, right? So, here in the story, the dominant group is defining what's normal, right? They think 3 eyes is normal, but to all of us, 2 eyes is normal, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? We kind of go through our lives quite, without any issue with just 2 eyes, right? And so there's a little bit of, the dominant group here is sort of communicating their superiority and their normalness, right? That whole play is about how, life with 3 eyes is normal and desirable. Life with 2 eyes, ugh. How could you even get out of bed in the morning with only 2 eyes, right? That's the message. And of course, how does she feel? how does she feel after watching that play? How does it come off to her? I'm sure all the 3-eyed people are like, oh, so inspiring. What?
She feels shameful.
Yeah, she feels shameful, right? The whole play was about how she's wrong, right? Her life is not worth living, right? And so here she is surrounded, in a theater by people who believe this, and a play that is sort of communicating the same message, right? That is true. Are there any others? We've got the doctor, we've got the waitress in the restaurant, we've got the girls and the woman in the shop, we've got the play. Good morning, Poom. I think that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Is there anything else that sort of, well, actually, maybe I'll ask you this question here. Maybe not 3 of them, but are there things that come up in this story that you can think of? There's a comparison to real life that either you've seen or experienced, or do any of those connect to real life? Yeah?
Yeah, I can't find any.
It all sounds so familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nicole, did you?
No,
No?
not good.
No? But can we, yeah?
In my country, the main job is necessarily with sexual work.
Right.
And in the party, so when I don't do that, and I feel that people sees me and you are different, you are strange, and maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Right. So that, I guess that kind of social reaction is very, you can really feel it, right? And you can really feel that, oh, something's, you're different, right? You're not doing what you're supposed to do, right? You're not following a social rule, kind of thing. And people, yeah, you can feel it, right? You can feel it in the room, and it's uncomfortable, I guess, hey? Yeah, and that's good, because that's kind of what this character is feeling, I think, all the way through the story, right? These kind of messages that somehow she is different. Yeah, she's doing something wrong, or in her case, she is something wrong, which is worse, I think I would say. Any other kind of connections to real life? That's a good one. Any other connections to, yeah?
I don't know if it's I don't know if it's like an instinct or something that you do when you don't know. But like most of the people tend to be critical, but this time like the people in the story will say those that we think that are not, normal in society. So we tend to be more careful with them than the rest of the people. So I think it's just a reaction to it.
Like in real life, most people don't react in this strong way, or you're saying that in real life, when we see someone who's different, we feel a little sorry for them sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we do, right? I think I think it's natural to kind of look at people who are different from us in any way, really, and like make a comparison, right? Which to say, oh, I wonder what their life is like and my life, and you, I think sometimes we kind of instinctively do that, yeah, which is probably okay, I think. But yeah, it's tricky sometimes, right? Like how do you think about if you see someone who uses a wheelchair? You know, I wouldn't want to use one. Like I'm very happy not using one. But does that mean that the person in the wheelchair's life is less than mine, right? Or less worth living than mine, right? There's an interesting study. It was a TED Talk I saw a long time ago. I have no reason to show this TED Talk in here, so I won't. But it's really good. And the psychology professor who gives it, his work is on happiness. Okay, so he's trying to sort of quantify happiness and what it is. And one of the surveys one of the pieces of data he uses is he asks the audience. He says, "Okay, who do you think is happier? So, people who win the lottery, or people who have become quadriplegic, so their legs and their arms don't work anymore, they're in a wheelchair. Who do you think is happier?" You can go ahead and answer. I know what you're thinking. It's the lottery winner, right? Duh. In the talk he says this is a 1-question IQ test, right? So, yeah, of course the lottery winner is happier, right? But interestingly, if you check back with those people, 3 years later and check on their relative happiness, they both report equal levels of happiness. So, he goes on to say, well, that's strange, isn't it? Does that mean that winning the lottery is the same thing as becoming paraplegic? Like, how are these people at equal levels of happiness? And then he kind of goes on to talk about other things, which I won't talk about. But it is interesting, right? And where we compare ourselves to the lives of others and say, oh, maybe I would want that other person has that and I would want it, or that other person is like this and I wouldn't want that thing. But really, when you look at people's happiness, it's not really dependent on that thing, right? And so it's difficult to say, oh, okay, I wouldn't want that for me, but that person's life is not worse than mine, right? Anything else about this story that kind of feels like it connects to real life at all? Yeah.
I have watching about the poor people get the lottery, win the lottery.
Uh-huh.
And then in the next eight months, he become a poor again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happens sometimes too, right? People win the lottery and then they waste all their money and then poor again, right? Which I think is a very common thing for a lot of people to do. Yeah, they get really rich and then that's all gone. So just don't win the lottery, Poom. Whatever you do,
Why?
don't win it.
But I will keep it.
No, but that's not what we said. We said people lose it all the time. Some people. Invest it wisely. Rafay?
Yeah, like as who mentioned, like poor people. So I think I saw in like many movies and everything where there are like extremely rich people and they're walking through the New York street,
Uh-huh.
and then if poor guy asks something, they're like, get away from what they're talking about. So is that sort of something?
Well, yeah, that's a bit of like that's another type of social grouping or social class, right? The upper class, the 1% or whoever you want to call them, and then people at the bottom, right? And yeah, do people at the top think they're better than people at the bottom? Often they do, right? They have internalized messages of their group's superiority. They feel that they're on top because, that they should be on top, right? That they deserve their position at the top. And yeah, they treat people who are less than them as less than them, right? Yeah. course, not every wealthy, powerful person is like that, but I would imagine that many are. Yeah. Anything else that kind of connects to real life about this? In truth, the story is written, this story is written but in a way that really all of it is true, right? So obviously the three eyes, the three-eyed people don't exist, obviously, but all of these situations are things that happen, right? Things that happen in interactions between dominant group members and minoritized group members, right? It just depends on whether it was sort of a gay person or a transgender person or a person of color or a religious minority. The situations change, but the dynamics of them are often quite similar, right? And we'll come back to some of those a little bit later. Okay, so let's just tie up privilege here and then we can move on, okay? So one of the ways that we see internal and attitudinal dimensions of privilege playing out is through internalized dominance and internalized oppression, okay? Geez, I'm throwing more terms at you, that's not fair. So internalized dominance and internalized oppression are basically the acting out of people's prejudicial beliefs, okay? And we saw this already, right? Remember with Jane Elliott and the kids with blue and brown eyes? We saw this happen. The brown-eyed kids were told that they were more intelligent, and so they acted out their internalized dominance, right? They felt that they were better and smarter. They did better on their tests, but they also kind of discriminated against the blue-eyed kids, right? Because they thought they were better than them. The blue-eyed kids kind of acted out their internalized oppression, right? So they were in the minoritized group. They were told they were less smart and less good, and they kind of acted that out as well, right? So the power relationship started to, they started to interact in an unequal way because of the sort of prejudicial ideas that were planted, right? And so, this is internalized dominance is the acting out of your superior or dominant position. There's lots of ways to do this. One of the ways is through microaggressions. Have you ever heard of microaggressions? No? Okay. So microaggressions are probably most of what we see in terms of people interacting in ways that are hurtful to others, right? And they're really quick statements. Sometimes they're questions that things people say, things people ask, and sometimes they're not really meant to hurt or offend other people, but they do because there's an underlying message that reinforces that power differential between the two. Okay? It reinforces the inequality. It reminds the person in the minoritized group that, hey, you're down here and I'm up here, right? That's what it does. And so, again, sometimes they're intentional, a lot of times they are not, right? Because, again, people have absorbed these stereotypical messages in their subconscious and they don't know, right? So here's a couple of little microaggressions. So someone who sees someone who's multiracial, right? They come from an ethnic background that is not easily identifiable to people. They might say, "Oh, what are you anyway?" Right? And what's the underlying message there? What's being said, even though the person might not be trying to say that, but what's being said? Yeah, you look different. I don't know what box to put you in, so tell me what you are so I can put you in a box, right? What are you? And again, people are not what's or who's, right? But again, it communicates that message under the surface. What about this one? I bet you were beautiful when you were young. What's the message there? Yeah, you are not beautiful anymore, which is not a nice thing to say to people, right? But what does it also say about social groups? and the idea of beauty.
And age,
As you age, you get.
as you age, beauty fades.
Well, speak for yourself, man. Geez. Sorry, Malika, what did you say? Or was it Nicole? Who was it? Oh, okay. With masks on, sometimes I can never tell who I'm hearing.
I said that old people can be
Sure they can. But of course, societal ideas connect youth and beauty, right? And so, yeah, it reinforces the idea that not only are you not beautiful anymore, but beauty is something that belongs to youth, right? What about this last one here? Telling a person of color, oh, it's okay. I don't see you as black. Don't worry. I don't see you that way. What's the message there? Well, yeah, but what's the problem with that? But hence what?
It's like, oh, you're fine, but like instead other people aren't.
Right. Yeah. There's an underlying message here that to be black is a bad thing, right? Oh, don't worry, because I don't see you as black. And how would that make someone feel, right? I don't see you as what you are because I'm communicating that what you are is somehow not good or not desirable, right? I imagine that kind of at best feels weird and at worst feels kind of hurtful and upsetting, right? Also, is there another message? Is there another problem with saying this particular thing? It's okay, I don't see you. I don't see you as black. I don't see color. Is there another problem with that? Well, could we agree, let's just use the United States as an example. Could we agree that it is a different experience living in the United States as a white person versus living in the United States as a black person? Is that a different experience? Yeah, right? And I imagine that it's much more difficult to live as a black person in the United States than it is to be a white person, I would imagine. But what do I say here when I say, oh, I don't see you as black? It's almost like I'm saying, but I don't see the fact that your life is different from mine, right? I don't acknowledge it. I don't think, I think we're both having the same experience here. So don't worry, I don't see you as black, and I don't acknowledge that you're having a totally different experience than me, right? So again, that one's got some hidden messages as well, and I'm sure that a person who would say that, isn't trying to be hurtful, right? They're not trying to be a jerk. They're probably not racist. They're probably just trying to communicate something positive, right? They're trying to say that, hey, I see you as a person and I like you, right? But again, they're kind of botching it because there are these sort of societal stereotypes and things kind of under the surface. And again, I imagine that the person who said this was not trying to cause any harm, but that's why they're microaggressions, right? That's why they're these tiny little pokes, right? And people feel them, right? People in minoritized groups feel them, but they're tiny, and again, in many cases, they're not intentional. I've got a whole bunch of other ones here that you can look at. I won't read through them all because that's ridiculous. But yeah, so lots of people here in Vancouver, lots of people of Asian descent, will sometimes complain about people asking them where they're from, right? People on the sky saying, oh, where are you from? And, Vancouver's a very multicultural city, but Vancouver also has a pretty big population of Asian descent. And those Asian people have been here in Vancouver and in BC for a long time, right? In some cases, a couple of 100 years. And so, you know, for a lot of people who are of Asian descent in Vancouver, it's possible that they, you know, just arrived on a plane a couple hours ago, but it's also possible that they are Canadians and they have lived here, they were born here, and their parents were born here, and even their grandparents might have been born here. And so, in saying, you know, oh, where are you from, to just a random Asian person on the SkyTrain, what's the underlying message there? Oh, I guess it says it right there, but what is it? What's that?
You are a foreigner.
You're a foreigner. You don't belong here. What are you even doing here anyway, right? That's the message, right? The message is that why does no one ever ask me where I'm from? Because nobody ever does. Why does nobody ever ask me?
Because I guess I might know.
Because what?
Because I think you might be a candidate.
I might be.
Candidate.
Well, yes, I am Canadian, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But why aren't people? Why do people assume that about me? Because I'm white, right? So, the underlying message here of, oh, where are you from, is this is what Canadian looks like, right? Canadian is white, and if you are not white, then you must be from somewhere else, right? Of course, there's colonial aspects to that as well, because of course us white people are from somewhere else as well, right? Only if you're an indigenous person, like a First Nations person, only then are you not from somewhere else. Only then are you actually from here, right? All of us are from somewhere else. But again, there's this underlying one. Have you heard? If we just look at the list here of microaggressions in the middle, has anyone said those things or had those things said to them? Yeah, which one?
Where are you from?
The where you're from?
Yeah.
Okay. Although I think, oh, which one?
You speak good English as well.
Oh, okay. Although I think, like in Columbia College, I think you can probably get away with asking where people are from, because all of our students are international, so you are all from somewhere else. Like we kind of know that, but out on the street, I would be more careful with it. So who said that you spoke good English?
Quite a bit.
Quite a few people.
Okay.
They were surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my English teacher as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Which again is in part it's a compliment, right? It's nice to hear, especially if English is your second or maybe even your third language. It is nice to hear that your English is good, right? Because it's a disaster of a language and it's hard to learn, right? Isn't it a mess? Isn't English a messy language? You're okay with it? Oh, I feel so bad. Like when I know people, who have learned English as a second or third language, I almost feel like, you know, when someone comes over to your house and it's like really messy, and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, I really should have cleaned up, and it's such a disaster. Let me move some things for, you know. That's how I feel about English. I feel like English is just like a messy disaster of a language, and I feel bad for you having to learn it, because it's just.
I think the speaking is fine. It's just the nouns, adjectives, stuff like that. It's not important. It's annoying.
That's annoying. Well, Rafay, what were you saying?
For English, we're very sensitive.
Say again.
From nursery, we
Uh-huh.
start learning English.
Okay.
So I think it's not that messy. But as we graduate, it's just like any other language. Like
Uh-huh.
our first language. It's not
Right.
so many meanings.
Yeah, as you become fluent in it, yeah, you start to think in it, right? And it flows better. But yeah, like, why is nothing spelled the way it sounds? Like, why do you have to memorize the spelling of every single thing? Because nothing makes any sense. And then the rules apply sometimes and then others, and we don't really speak the way we write, and I don't know. It's a mess. It's a messy language. I took, in university, I took Russian for 3 years. And Russian I liked, because Russian is like very organized. all of the rules apply all the time, except for like just a handful of exceptions. Everything is spelled the way it sounds. It's glorious. So easy. Well, it's not easy. It works differently than English does, but everything is like, yeah, like you can predict how it's going to, bless you, how it's going to work, right? English is just,
Do you still speak Russian?
yeah, no. I've forgotten a lot of it. I've forgotten a lot of it. I could probably, if I did some studying, I could probably get it back. But it's been, since I was at like my most fluent, it's been about 10 or 11 years. So I've forgotten a lot of. I've forgotten a lot of Slovi. What's that? Как дела? Сегодня нормально, хорошо. Может быть? Да, нормально. Yeah. See, was that proof? Is it good enough? Do you know what I said?
Nope.
Oh, I said yeah. So I said today, and then I said yeah, I'm good or fine, and then I was like okay, I'm fine. Yeah, yeah. That's what I said. Right. So there's a bunch of these. There's a bunch of these here, and again, all of them have underlying messages, and they communicate that inequality, right? They communicate that idea that, you know, I'm up here and you're down there, or vice versa, right? And so, do I have more? Oh yeah, I have more too. Yeah, and all of these are just little microaggressions, and they are, you know, in many cases not meant to be hurtful, but they can be, right? Because I think we all intuitively know, can you hurt someone without meaning to? Yeah, right? We do it all the time as humans, right? We say the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing, forget about something or someone, or say something stupid, or yeah, that's just what human beings do. And so, yeah, it's very easy to hurt other people sometimes with these, because again, there are, you know, on the surface they seem okay, but there are more complicated messages below them. Okay? Oh my gosh, okay, we're not going to look at all those. Internalized oppression, again, is when people act out their sort of minoritized group role, okay? And it's strange because, again, you would think people wouldn't do this, right? It's not really in their best interest to buy into negative stereotypes about themselves or their group. But, again, socialization is a strong force, right? Just like Katie was socialized by Regina, even though she didn't want to be, people absorb social messages, even if those social messages are not really that good for them, right? And so, yeah, this is often what people in minoritized groups find themselves doing. Not all people, not all the time, but sometimes, yeah, they sort of endure these microaggressions without kind of pointing it out, right? Why would they not? If somebody said something to you that was upsetting, a microaggression, why would you not call them out on it? Why would you not say, "Hey, that's really hurtful and has racist undertones"? Why would you not say that? What's that?
To avoid an argument.
Yeah, to avoid an argument, maybe, right? To avoid a confrontation, to avoid somebody minimizing your feelings, saying, "I'm just kidding. It's just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" Right? That will come up a lot. So, yeah, so sometimes people in minoritized groups will kind of have to endure this sort of thing. I won't go through all of these here. Yeah, I won't go through all of them, but we'll talk about them a little bit more. Ooh, and I've got even more for your reading pleasure. So again, people who are in privileged positions will often act like this. People in minoritized positions will tend to act like this. Again, not everybody, not all the time, but sometimes you can see this this dynamic kind of working itself out. Let me just see if there's anything that stands out to me. Does anything stand out to you here? This one's good here. Views self as logical, rational, sees others as too emotional or out of control, right? This almost sounds like men, right? Men are in the privileged position. Men often think of themselves as logical and, you know, in control of their emotions, and they often think women are too emotional, or at least they did in the past. We're kind of, you know, it's 2021 already, right? But still, traditionally speaking, women were thought of as too emotional, right? Too, you know, too illogical, right? To, you know, to make hard decisions. But of course, who defines what's more desirable, right? Men do. Men are in power. So the logic and the unemotionality is what's valued, right? We don't say that, ugh, men are not nearly emotional enough, and they're way too logical. Ugh. We never say that, right? We always say the other way around. Okay, so I won't go through all those, but what I will say is this last point, that again, privilege is often invisible to those who have it, okay? And often people, when you point out privilege to people with it, they often like to explain it as, well, you know, I got it through hard work, right? I got here, and if other people want what I have, then they just have to work hard too, right? So often people will dismiss their privilege and explain it in terms of personal characteristics, right? So here I sit in front of you. I have a pretty decent job. You know, I have, you know, a few university degrees. You know, I'm living a pretty good life. And, you know, part of that is due to my hard work, right? I went to school for a long time. I've, you know, worked hard to learn the things that I know and to sort of structure my classes. Like I've worked hard on that. But have I also benefited by being a white male in Canada? Probably I have, right? Again, can I tell exactly when? No, right? It's probably benefited me. I don't know how and I don't know when. There's been some hard work as well, right? But it's not the only reason for my success. And so, what did I say here? Yeah, so people in the dominant group are often unaware of their privilege, and they're often even unaware of their belonging to a dominant group. Okay, they often feel that they're just people, right? And that's kind of the benefit of being in the dominant group. The dominant group gets to be seen as people, right? Not through the lens of their group, right? So in the US they have African Americans, Asian Americans, Indian Americans, South Asian Americans, and then they just have Americans, right? Which are white people. Do we say Caucasian Americans? Is that anything you've ever heard? No. Or white Americans? Maybe a little bit more now that we're having conversations about race in the United States. But yeah, you don't often hear that, right? You hear the people who are different are the ones who are kind of labeled. And the people who are in the dominant group, they just get to be seen as normal, right? The default. Because Americans are white, right? As are Canadians, right? And then we have Asian Canadians and African Canadians and Indigenous Canadians and so on and so forth. And yeah, the last thing I'll say here, of course, is that, again, privilege is like a fish swimming in the water or you running with the wind at your back. The fish doesn't notice the current pushing him along, right? You don't really notice the wind pushing you as you run, but then if you turn around and go the other way, definitely notice it, right? You know it's there. And again, people in the dominant group often don't feel their privilege, but people who don't have it definitely feel it when it is not there. Okay? So, that's enough, I think, for oppression and power and privilege. Next, we'll go into ableism, but first, we will take a break because we've been working really hard here. and we need a break. So, take a break, come back in 10 minutes, and we'll talk about ableism. Okay, and we are back. So, finally, we are ready to look at one particular type of oppression, ableism. Okay, so we've kind of done the work in terms of our theoretical approach. We've learned how culture and socialization are important to consider when talking about social justice ideas. We've learned about what oppression is, and power and privilege, and how stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination, how all of that works. Now that we have the vocabulary and the concepts, we can talk about these things in kind of a sophisticated way, all right? So let's start off with ableism. Ableism is kind of a strange thing to start with, maybe, because I think when we talk about social inequality, most of us probably think of racism first, right? Maybe sexism, maybe religious oppression third, maybe, or like discrimination against LGBTQ people, maybe. But kind of after that, most people kind of aren't sure what other social inequalities there are. Maybe class divisions, right, between the rich and the poor. Most people don't think of ableism first and foremost. And in one way, that's why we're going to start with it. Because we might be least familiar with it, it'll be easier to kind of understand how it works, right? Instead of starting with racism, which we all have kind of ideas about anyway, okay? So, ableism is, again, an unequal societal relationship between people who are seen as able-bodied and people who are disabled, or, who are against people who are disabled, okay? And the people who fit into this category are kind of interesting because they are so diverse, right? So if you're looking at, I don't know, if you're looking at sexism, you have a relationship between men and women and people of other genders, right? So everybody over here is a man, everyone over here is a woman or a transgender person, which we'll get to. But with people with disabilities, you can see there's all kinds of different experiences that fall into this category, right? There's people with all of these types of different disabilities that may influence how they live their lives in society and the challenges they might face, right? So yeah, people who are vision impaired, right? People who have only partial vision, or maybe they have no vision at all, right? Their experience of society is going to be very different, right? People who have sort of moderate hearing challenges, or people who cannot hear at all, right? That's a very different set of challenges for people who can't hear, right? People with mental health conditions. And again, for the most part, I think we're talking about more extreme versions of mental health issues. Yes, many of us have anxiety. Yes, some of us are prone to depression now and again. Those are quite common, but here we're talking about more extreme things, right? People with very severe depression or severe anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and other sort of extreme mental health conditions. That influences the way that they are treated by society, right? People with intellectual disabilities, right? For whatever reason, they may struggle to kind of interact with other people or to take care of themselves, right? Similarly, people who have an acquired brain injury, so people who have injured their brain in the past, they will have a unique set of challenges as well, right? People on the autism spectrum, right? People on the autism spectrum tend to struggle with kind of social information, reading people's social cues and kind of responding appropriately, among some other things as well. That's going to influence their experience of society as well, right? And of course, physical disabilities, right? Whether people use a wheelchair or a walker or a cane, people who can use their hands or cannot, all of that's going to change how they live their lives and how society treats them, right? And particularly, I would say, there's a pretty big distinction between physical disabilities and mental ones, right? I think that society in general, our society, Western society here, is much more accepting of physical disease than it is mental disease, right? So here in Canada, if you wind up getting cancer, you're going to get excellent treatment, right? The doctors are going to be on it. They're going to be injecting you with stuff, and you're going to be going to chemo, and you're probably going to recover because we are excellent at treating those types of diseases. But if you wind up developing schizophrenia, for instance, you're not going to get quite the same support, right? Our mental health support is not as robust and compassionate as our physical health providers, right? And again, because there's a lot of stigma, right? There's a lot of stereotype. We feel sadness and compassion for people with physical health problems, People with mental health problems, again, there's a lot of stigma, right? Are they crazy? You know, do they just need to suck it up and stop being so depressed all the time, right? We have different feelings about that, right? And so, again, depending on what the nature of a person's disability is, that will change their experience of society. It will change the challenges that they encounter, right? So, this is a difficult one to talk about, in that I imagine most of us are in the dominant group here, right? Most of us fit into able people, both physically and mentally. Again, if you suffer from a little bit of depression or anxiety here and there now and again, you know, that probably doesn't entirely place you within this group, but, you know, more severe forms of those mental health challenges would fit in here. But again, it's hard for us to talk about, and so what I wanted to do was to let someone else talk about it for us. And so what we'll do is we'll watch this little documentary called The Ugly Face of Disability: Hate Crimes. And so the person who's narrating the documentary, Adam Pearson, he will kind of introduce us to ableism, or disableism as he'll call it, because he's British. We'll talk a little bit about hate crimes. We'll get to speak to people with disabilities and see their experiences and how kind of society affects how they live their lives. Okay? As you can see, I've got a bunch of questions here, which of course we will answer. I'm going to post all of this in Microsoft Teams, so you'll have it. But while I've got your attention, or hopefully I've got your attention, I'm going to let you finish watching this tomorrow on your own, because I will not be here tomorrow. I'm moving, and so all day long I will be moving heavy things into a truck and out of a truck in the 26-degree sun, so I cannot be here tomorrow. So we'll start watching this here, but what I would like you to do tomorrow is to finish watching the video and finish answering the questions, so that on Thursday we can sort of dive right in and start talking about what we saw in that documentary. Okay? Is that okay? Cool? Okay. I'm sorry, I know you'll miss me, but I can't afford movers. They're just too expensive, so I'm just gonna do it myself. Okay, so here's some questions for you that I want you to pay attention to. To which social groups does Adam Pearson belong? And which of those groups is a minoritized group and which one's a dominant one? Has he experienced, or in what ways does Adam experience discrimination? And are any of these little microaggressions? In what ways does Adam or other disabled persons, and we'll meet a few disabled persons here, how do they deal with kind of prejudicial statements or discrimination or microaggressions? How do they respond, and why? Okay. Maybe I won't read all of these. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So those should all be sort of self-evident as you watch the documentary. The questions will make sense to you, and again, we'll talk about all of these first thing on Thursday morning. Okay. Do you have some questions for me at the moment? Going once. Going twice. Sold. Now we're going to watch just part of the video. So we'll watch maybe the first 15 minutes or so. Okay? Just to sort of get us into it, okay? What's that? This is social justice.
Right.
What about history? We'll get to that in history. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Seeing none. For online people, I'm going to end the live stream now. So You can go ahead and watch the full video now, or you can watch the rest of it tomorrow, whatever you like. There won't be any class tomorrow. We'll be back on Thursday, okay? Because again, I can't be here tomorrow. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you Thursday, okay, online people?